Hey everybody, I am Monica Sigmon, Sony Artisan of Imagery, and I am super duper excited today to be starting our brand new series featuring Sony Alpha Females and some of the incredible work that they're doing. So when I approached B&H about this series, they were super excited about doing it, and they understood that there's so much talent, and especially in our community, there's so many different kinds of talent, so many diverse skill sets. So I'm really excited to start off this series with Caroline Jensen, who is also a Sony Artisan of Imagery. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, dear.
I'm going to change my view here just a little bit so I can see you more clearly. And for those of you who don't know Caroline, I'm just going to take 2 seconds here and pop up a few of her images that I super, super love. And you can see them here. So these are the images that make my heart so happy. I look at your work, Caroline, and I feel like this is what I want to do in my next life because I love flowers and I love art and I love photography, and you make it look so simple, but we know it's not. And so we're excited to dive in today and learn more about what you do and how you do it. And I know there's a lot of people that are excited about this podcast. So thank you for being my very first.
Thank you for having me. I
Very,
feel
very
honored.
well. I tell you, when I started to kind of rough in who I wanted on this series, it's of course there's a ton of people I want to interview, but I started thinking about who really welcomed me into the program
Um,
with such big hearts, and there's several of you guys that just made me feel so welcome when I got brought on to the artisan group, and I'll never forget how you guys just made me feel so at home and like I'd been there forever. And so it's really special to start with you. So thank you
well,
for
your
always
work
making me feel welcome.
is swoon worthy. I saw your work and I'm like, okay, that's my girl. That's the lighting I like.
Well, that's very, very kind. So we'll
Yeah.
close this session of the Mutual Admiration
Okay.
Society. And I've been thinking long and hard about this because I don't know if I should introduce you as a photographer first or a flower farmer first. So kind of tell everybody like what came first, who you are, give them a little bit of background so they know who we're talking to today.
Well, I've been a photographer since 2008. And at that time, I was photographing my children. I moved a lot for the military. My husband was active duty for 26 years. And so I photographed my children, I photographed our moves. But then there was always that lull, the downtime between things. As they got older, they didn't want to be in front of the camera as much, or I just didn't feel like photographing my kids. I wanted to do something else. And I always fell back to flowers. I've always loved flowers. I've always loved gardening. Couldn't do it all the time. It was something that was kind of a pleasure to do once I moved back to my farm when my husband retired from the military. But, winter, odd seasons, flowers and macro particular were really important to me. But I didn't realize how important they were until I went through a really hard, rough patch about 10 years ago with one of my children. And it was a super hard, rough patch. Like I'm talking about the most challenging parenting aspects that you would ever touch on. And through that really challenging time, my macro lens in particular, and well, also other nice lenses, but really macro in particular, just solved a problem for me. I would take my camera, I'd run into the field, and I would shoot dandelions, clover, creeping Charlie. I would photograph whatever was there as an excuse to go cry. I didn't want to have my kids see me upset, so that was my excuse. And it was at that point that I realized the healing power of nature photography, particularly macro, and one that's all encompassing, one that requires a lot of steady effort and mind control and a lot of it's all consuming. And it became this escape, this release for me. And at that point I realized that this is something that I want to help other people do. And I want them to get that dopamine hit when they photograph a beautiful flower, especially something silly like a clover or a dandelion. If you can do something majestic with that, it's just really gratifying. And it's also seeing the world that is unseen and usually ignored. being able to make a beautiful picture like New York City and a weed that's coming out of the sidewalk is really just, it's kind of mind blowing when you first experience it. And I wanted to give that to other people. And of course, there's an evolution. I still love to photograph people. I still occasionally do headshots and family sessions and things like that. But the passion for flowers just really started to spill over in that I was like, my husband's a farmer. He's also a baker, but we own a farm. And I'm like, can I have some land? Can I start to grow some of these things? And, he put the kibosh on our house in town. We have a farm and a house in town. And he's like, no more grass. You can't take any more of my grass. But I started to do prairie conservation plots that the Minnesota government gave me grants for. I started to grow more things and photograph more things, and it snowballed. And the truth is, with flowers, you have to pick them. If you grow 10,000 flowers, if you don't pick them, they just die. Like, you have to keep harvesting. And so that's sort of my husband's, can you make money doing this too? Can you sell these flowers?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, okay. So then flower farming was really the response to photography, not the initial impetus. That was the response to photography. And so that has snowballed. So now I'm a proper flower farmer. I have 3 separate farms. I work with perennials. I work with breeding. I work with annuals. I do a lot of fun things. But at the heart of it all is photographing it. The reason I do it is to have a place to photograph, and that may spur off into photographing seniors in a beautiful flower field here or there too. But for the most part, flowers have become my heart and soul, and it's something that I want to share with others.
Well, you can see it in your work, and I really hope that my husband is not listening to this today, because all of my dreams that I have threatened about, like plowing the back 9 and, to turning them into cutting gardens and everything else that he thought I had maybe outgrown will be revived now after this conversation.
It's a wonderful therapy. It's full on therapy. And if you know your way around a camera, it can become so much more. So.
Well, and it's really that full cycle for me. I love, like, okay, I'm planting these seeds intentionally because I'm going to enjoy these flowers in the home. And then I'm going to photograph them. And then I've moved into like pressing flowers and drying flowers. And I don't know yet what I'm going to do with those, but they are collecting in nice boxes in my workshop. Okay, so flower farming has come secondary, and now that's like really full time. You're in Minnesota though, so it's not all year long.
No, but I'm busy year round. A lot of the perennials that I do, I start in the autumn. They stay in a greenhouse and continue to grow, and then they get planted out in the spring. So I collect seeds. I breed daylilies. I'm thinking of breeding irises. There's a lot of things I can do during the winter, but in the winter, I photograph dried flowers. I mean, winter is definitely the downtime. I look forward to like Thanksgiving, because that means it's done and I can breathe for a little bit, because it's a marathon from April to about November. It's pretty busy. But the winter downtime, yeah.
When you and I were preparing for this, you said something really interesting, and you said flower photography is different than flower portraiture. And as a portraitist myself, that piqued my interest. So talk to me a little bit about how you differentiate those two and how they satisfy your need differently. That need, you said, like to escape or be still, and the stress relief. How is it different?
Well, there's a difference between photographing, say, a landscape shot of a garden than it is to dig in deeper and look for the personality of a flower. At my heart, I'm a portrait photographer. At my heart, I like to photograph people. So when I look at flowers, I'm looking at them as a subject. I'm looking at each individual blossom as a person, or as an entity that I want to bring out the details of. I think that's very different than just photographing something pretty. On Instagram, you're flooded with lots of like pretty scenes where you see a tulip field or a pretty arrangement on a mantle or something like that. But I'm looking to drill deeper. I'm looking to find the quirky curled petal, or the quirky curled leaf, or the way that flowers are interacting with each other. that has almost an anthropomorphic vibe to it. I'm always looking to see the personality behind it. And that kind of search and that kind of attention is all consuming. You know, it's more detail driven than just recording something beautiful. And yeah, so it's very much like is I would treat it the same as I would a person. I'm looking for its best angle. I'm looking for the way the light is hitting. Is it the most attractive angle? There's a lot of thought processes that mirror individual portraiture. And just incidentally, as a people photographer, I always was more gravitating toward photographing a single person versus a group.
Mhm.
My brain, personally, though, this is just me, I work better connecting with one-on-one with somebody. If I would do a big group, it's like, I can't get that.
Yeah.
I'm just not wired that way. So that translates over to my flower photography as well. Try as I might to be more, to move my style away from individual flowers or like groups of 3 or less. It's just the way I am.
Yeah. So yeah, I love that. And then, so walk us through a little bit about, so let's take that for an example, because I've seen you have portraits of arrangements on your feed, and then you have all of these
Yeah.
beautiful individual studies. So, which by the way, your reel yesterday was awesome because you showed like how to, with your iPhone, you can take a picture of a tulip and then what it looks like with a little bit more intention and equipment. And I love that you didn't shame those of us who are still taking flower pictures with our iPhones, but that you were able to show the difference. So
I taught iPhone photography for a long time too. And it's just a different animal. It's just it has a different purpose. So it's not right or wrong. It's just, if I'm looking to make wall art, I'm going to grab my big camera and my off-camera flash and look like a dork in the garden. So
I love it. So let's get into that because I know you have slides and
let me go in here and share my screen. And can you see it?
yes, we
Oh,
can
good.
see.
Okay. So I am going to first, before we get started, just jump into my gear really quick because I'm sure that people
That's always a big question. Yep.
And I choose all these things very strategically. Nothing here is random. So I use the A7R5, and the reason I choose this one is the high resolution. So a lot of times when I'm doing reels or things like that, I will take one picture, one horizontal picture, and I will slice and dice it into 6 different pictures and string them together with music for content. And I do that because I shoot both singular portraits and also for projects like book. I'm working on a book with a flower farmer right now. And so that job requires bigger arrangements. And so Instagram doesn't do them justice. So I use that one very specifically for its high resolution. And my favorite lens for literally over 2 years now has been the 50G Master. I like that it has a fairly solid minimum focusing distance, which gives me a lot of latitude. I can step back and get a big arrangement, and I can also punch in. It's so insanely detailed. Like, it's just my favorite. And so that's my go-to usually. I also use the 9D macro if I want to get in really close. And my latest favorite is the 24, which is pretty interesting for singular portraits, like bigger flowers, like from roses up to like sunflowers, because it gives a little bit of that crazy distortion. Not a lot. It's just the nature of a 24mm, and it has a close focusing distance, and it makes it seem larger than life. Like, there's a lot of presence when you use the 24mm kind of up close with a really detailed flower at f16 or whatever it is. I think it's f16.
That's so interesting because Michael just started a project called Roadwork, and it's all about people in their environments, craftsmen, artists, everything else. He's doing them all over the country, and he's shooting the whole project with 24mm with the 24 GM. And the way he works that lens, it makes it look like a telephoto almost, but it does have that really cool, it's an unexpected lens. So I'm just loving all these parallels that you're having with your flower portraits that we have at our studio, because the A7R5 is our gear of choice too. I mean, you'd have to pry it out of my cold dead hands. So it's just really interesting to see all of these parallels, and the 50 is not a lens that I use often, but I've started using it recently. And I really, really love it. The 50 1.4, I really, really love it. So this is
Yeah, at 1.2, I don't use it very often, which is ironic since I also love bokeh and all of that, but I actually shoot it at f16 most of the time.
Really,
And it's
really.
just so ridiculously sharp. Like I'm all about the details, so I need that. The 90 macro is great as well, but the 50 is just has my heart. There's just something very unique about it that I just
Do you feel like you, oh, see, that's counterintuitive to what I would think. Cause I would think, oh, if I'm going to photograph a flower, I want it to be shallow depth of field and like let the background, but you're saying you want all of that detail in each of the specimens that you're photographing. Is that what you're doing?
right. And I think that there's a place for shallow depth of field flowers for sure, but there's also flowers are challenging. They are not flat, like unless you're photographing a daisy from the top. I mean, everything it has a lot of three dimension to it. Flowers that are going in 365 degrees and also sticking up. Like it's difficult. It can look really awkward to have the wrong thing in focus.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're stepped back and you're like photographing some tulips from the side and you want some pretty bokeh, like I get that. They have a fairly flat face. You know, it works shallow for some flowers really well. Other flowers, not so much. I mean, even with the 90 macro, I'm still shooting at f8 or f16 and it's still
Really?
shallow. But it's really about I like people to explore my pictures. I want them to be able to pinch and zoom and look in and see all the details. And that's sort of the reason behind it. I also love beautiful bokeh, but it's harder. It's more isolated to, you know, golden hour or early morning or when the sun is beautiful. And I like to just go out when I have time,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
which is why I use the lighting that I do. Which is this is my basic set. So I have two studios, and I'll walk you through both of them. I have a tiny studio, which is about 5 feet by 7 feet on a back porch, and then I have a bigger studio, which is about 40 by 20 in my lower level here. But this is my overall setup. I use a studio strobe, the 7-foot umbrella, balanced light, really soft, and the example here on the right is what how I photograph it. I put the light where it's blasting me. It's really blasting into the camera. So it's very diffused. It's just sort of grazing across the front of whatever I'm photographing. So that's my studio setup. And then my little studio, I'm going to skip this one here to go down to my teeny studio. That works with LED lights. So a lot of times I'll run out to the garden, snip a few stems and bring them in and photograph them in this like permanently set up studio, which has a LED mat that's 2 foot by 2 foot, and then a little 1 foot by 1 foot LED mat. And I just balance the light. I use the big one as fill, the little one as a spotlight, and I just plunk it into a flower frog or into a vase and record individual portraits that way if I'm not shooting in the garden.
So
This one
let me,
actually
oh, go ahead.
this one goes out to the garden with me. And sometimes I'll reduce it to like a 42 or 43-inch umbrella instead, so it doesn't blow away. But yeah, I bring both. I mean, I'll bring this or a flash into the garden itself, and then I'll also cut things and bring them in. It just depends on how I best want to show something off.
Okay, so I'm going to ask some questions because I'll forget. So
Okay.
going back up to the 7-foot umbrella there,
Right.
again, just another parallel. I love that you can see it on the right-hand side here, because it really is like we do this in portraiture too. It's feathering
Right.
across.
Exactly.
Because we want to see the shapes and the dimensions. So on a face, we want to see cheekbones, we want to see the nose, we want to see the profile. So we want to see all of those things. And it just would not have occurred to me to do the same thing with flowers, because again, you're talking about flowers being three-dimensional, and I'm just not thinking about that way. So love these parallels. And for any other portrait photographers on this, watching this webinar, I hope that this is as exciting to them as it is to me.
Yeah,
But
just translate what you do for portraiture to flowers. Absolutely.
So I love that. And then go back, if you can scroll back down to your tiny studio. So talk to me, you said that your main, your window, the 2x2 over there on the left is actually working as your fill. Is that what you
Quite
said?
often, yes.
Yeah. So you're really using that 1x1 panel, the constant light panel there to highlight what you want. And then that window light, that simulated window light is just kind of adding some energy to the scene and to the shadows. Is that correct?
Right. Just a 1x1 LED panel is going to give you a very pronounced spotlight effect, which can be nice, but it does lend itself to some really deep and dark shadows, especially if you have a longer stem or leaves. You need some kind of fill. You
Mhm.
could definitely use a reflector to bounce. I just have this wonderful LED light that has traveled with me constantly since 2015, and it still works, so I still use it. And I just have it turned down to maybe 10 out of 100 power, just enough to fill. I can use it as a primary light source, especially for slightly bigger arrangements, and then I'll use the 1x1 as a fill. It can reverse, but generally speaking, if I'm photographing a single rose or two roses or three roses that or a small arrangement, that's going to be the 1x1 is going to be my primary blast of light, and then the big one will be the fill.
Awesome. Okay. Carry on. Love it.
Yeah, and then I tend to use fairly deep depth of field. I think I'm going to not go too deep into that, but yes, I definitely do a deeper depth of field, which, as we've discussed, is kind of counter the general thinking. You
Sure.
see a lot of ethereal, beautiful, light and airy, bokeh-driven imagery like on Instagram, and I absolutely love that, and I absolutely will shoot that way when I have the opportunity. But as a method of recording my garden and making fine art pictures, I tend to go deeper depth of field. Here's a my third grade illustration here of how
Love
I
it.
shoot in the garden. I definitely get the light close. So if these were my roses, I would have my 42-inch umbrella or my 7-foot umbrella, whatever I have that day, right next to it, like literally within just off the frame of whatever I'm shooting. It's right there. And I think that's what gives the best rendition of the gentle, soft shadows. The huge light source close to all those details makes all the difference. I have used a 2-foot umbrella before, especially when traveling. Like when I went to the flower show in Philadelphia, I took a 2-foot umbrella and bounced a flash into it, and it's beautiful, but it's not the same as a 42 or a 7-foot. Like it's just not the same.
So, Caroline, before we go too much further, can you show an example of one of your portraits that you have shot this way? Okay, so that's out in the field.
I was
Perfect.
ready for you. No, so
Great.
I breed daylilies, and this is the parent plant that I collect seeds from every year to try to recreate this. And the light source was literally right here. Like the edge of the light source was right, literally off the edge of the frame. And at full power, and f16, and it just gets all of these little details.
It's incredible. My daylilies do not look like that.
No, I get some very wild, not I don't I purchase them from individual sellers, like from
Uh-huh.
their gardens, personal
Yeah.
gardens. These are not
Oh,
ones
okay.
like
Okay.
at a big box store.
Those
You have to
are
dig a little bit to
stunning.
find things like this. Yeah.
I love
Um,
the pink.
and
So
yeah,
that glow coming in from the top left corner, is that
that's a little bit of
something?
editing magic. I will say that. So
Okay.
here's where that came from, and I will be honest. I'll explain where that came from. I see the modeling light
Hmm.
hitting the flowers, and I see the glow. I'm seeing the glow.
Right.
When you hit the flash f16, it's not always that. Sometimes it is because I'm flaring it into the camera. Like the light, as you see here, is shooting at me. It's shooting into the lens.
Hmm.
And there usually is a little bit of flare. I enhance it in Photoshop a bit and make it more obvious. But that's what the modeling light looks to me.
Yeah.
And I'm not, I mean, it's a little bit of editing magic for sure. It's not 100% real, so sorry.
No,
But
no,
I love it, it's not,
I think
I
it's
like it because it's more faithful to how I'm seeing it, and that's why I do it.
I think that as artists, we have to bring that vision forward. We do the same thing with families and children. And so that's how we see it. And you're just illustrating it for us. So I don't think that's any negative in any way. And that's why I asked about it
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I
Well,
think it's
that's a
such
big
a beautiful
question.
interest.
I would say probably half the time there's flare like that when I'm shooting. It just depends on what the angle is. If I'm slightly to the left or slightly to the right. If I shot this slightly more to the right, I would have had that naturally occurring, but I
Right.
can't control it as well either. Sometimes the flare is too much.
Hmm.
And the lenses are so good that they control flare to the degree that you don't get it often. Like
Yeah.
not like using a vintage lens or something where you're like,
Right,
okay,
right.
I need to move because I'm not getting anything, you know, it's all flaring. The lenses are so awesome at controlling that. And so yeah, I'd say about half the time I get a little bit enough that I can enhance it without doing anything else in Photoshop, just a little bit of highlight.
I wish I could do a live poll and just see how many people are surprised that this is out in the field, because especially like you had a version of this on Instagram, I think that was a little bit closer in.
Yeah, it was a crop in.
And I never would have thought, even when now that I see the greenery, I'm like, oh, it's a part of a bigger arrangement and she's brought it inside. And so that's really, really cool to see.
Yeah, this type of flower you cannot cut because it blooms for a day and then it dies. And then these buds that you see here would bloom in consecutive days. So if I cut off the stem, it would just die. There wouldn't be anything there. So it has to be shot in the garden, which is why I started dragging the light out, because I wanted to recreate the light that I was doing inside and bring that outside. And so it was quite a challenge at first, but now that I have it, it's like clockwork.
So beautiful.
Yeah, it's just bam, bam. I can do it in 5 minutes now.
So beautiful.
And let's see. So that's inside. I showed that one before. And this is a rose that was outside.
So what makes you decide if you want the light, like when you're out in the field, you're saying sometimes it's just right up close to it from the side and some of it's from behind the flowers. So talk a little bit about your thought process there. What makes that decision for you?
I would like to be more scientific about it, but literally it's where the light stand will sit. Because you're working outside. I mean, there are flowers on flowers on flowers, and you're just trying not to crush something. So I get the light to where it actually is stable and it's not going to fall over. And then I just sort of turn the light on its axis.
Yeah.
And take multiple shots. And I'd like to say that this was super specific, but it was probably just where the light could go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah. And you're pleasantly surprised. I mean, when you have this is a David Austin rose. I think it's Harlow Carr, and it just has the crazy petal formation. And when you give the light something to grab onto, it's really fun. That's how I started to craft my garden was, well, what was going to photograph well? What is going to look really cool with moody lighting hitting it? And yeah, it's a lot of trial and error, but I buy plants and grow plants specifically that I think are going to photograph well.
And so was it a conscious decision then? Like you said, your images are more dark and moody. You know, it'd be so easy to go the other way with everything being light and airy and high key. And so what kind of draws you to this look?
So high key is a pain in the rear end when it comes to actual garden photography. You're going to have cars, siding, supports, boards, buckets, water lines. Like you're going to have all kinds of very unattractive things that are going to get in the way. The inverse square law is my very best friend when it comes to getting rid of chaos in the garden. Okay, I would love to have the most.
Let's pause right there and explain for everybody what the inverse square law is.
In its most very non-scientific way of explaining it, it's putting a huge light source close to your subject, which fills the subject with light and casts everything behind it into darkness. It's, big light source, little subject, very close. The farther away I move the light away from the subject, the more of the surroundings are going to be illuminated. Right. Thus bringing in all of the chaos again. And so this is a necessity. This is what I did just to eliminate all of the junk that just happens in a real garden. I don't live in a botanical garden. I mean, if I did, I could probably make beautiful, light and airy, awesome pictures, but I have to work with what I'm given. And I think a lot of people do. If you go to any beautiful botanical garden, you're going to have people everywhere. So I'm the one with the 24-inch light that I'm holding on a little gun thing. It's like a flash holder. So I can just shoot one-handed like this and eliminates that chaos.
So why do you prefer if you're shooting that close, and excuse the ignorant question,
No.
I hope our audience excuses it too, because they're probably like, duh. But if you're shooting if you're putting the light that close to the subject, explain why you still prefer that large light source as opposed to a concentrated light source.
It's just the nature of the light is softer. The bigger the light source next to a tiny subject, the more just dreamy it looks.
Mhm.
It's going to just gently wrap around the shadows. You're not going to get harsh lines. I mean, it's the difference. I mean, I guess for the layman, you know, the pop-up flash on your camera versus getting it off and moving it. I mean, it's just a drastic difference in the quality of the light. And it's the same thing here. If I could use a 10-foot light source, I probably would if it was
Yeah.
practical, but it's not. It's all about that ratio of the bigger the light to the subject and the closer you can get, the more dreamy it's going to be.
I think I really hope that people are picking up these tips because this is good stuff. Okay, I'm done interrupting for
No,
the next 30
you're
seconds at least.
no, you're good. These are two outdoor shots too, as I do shoot without flash. These are both without flash, and I'm looking for things like a curl here, and I'm not opposed to bringing Christmas lights into the flower field. So
Ah,
you can always bring fairy lights or Christmas lights, and you can't use flash really with those because it's going to overpower them. So if you're working with natural light and you want to create some fun, you know, get some warm white LED lights, make sure that they are high quality ones. So they don't flicker a lot because that's a real pain in the butt when you have half the lights lit and half not every time you take a shot. Yeah,
unless you're shooting with the A9 III with the global shutter, and then we don't have to
sure.
worry about
Oh,
that.
yeah, okay. You're right. There you go. That's one reason to get it because I love to shoot with these kind of things. But yeah, I do shoot out in the garden as well without flash or strobe. And also, this is very shallow by comparison. I think this is probably a 4 and maybe 2.8 over here. So it's possible. Now, these are all in the field as well.
So the
Like
one on
this
the left with the black, like almost completely black, that's in the
the
field.
pot in my front yard and the street is right behind it.
It's crazy.
Yep. And so the time of day does matter. So if it's really bright out, you have to use sometimes it's not you can't accomplish it. If it's too bright outside, the back of it may not be overpowered by the light. So this is usually, you know, at least later afternoon or an overcast day anytime, but not like full sun on a noonday. Noonday, that's not going to work. But like this was probably 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was in a field. And again, I was looking for relationships. I saw this and it kind of looked like the mother with all the children under her wings there. And I liked the relationship of the 5 there. So that's when I'm making a portrait of the flowers, I'm looking for those relationships. And this as well. Let me see if I can move this over a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. I liked the S curve here.
Do you feel like photographing people first helped you in your floral photography?
Absolutely.
Because I see a lot of
Absolutely.
things coming over.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think that any person who feels like they're a little burned out on people, maybe you're a senior portrait photographer or portrait photographer or something like that, and you get a little burned out with your camera and you want to kind of reinvigorate your creativity, photographing flowers and applying those things you know to subjects that aren't going to talk back and not ask you to fix anything, and you don't have to correct skin or eyeballs or
Yeah.
gray hairs or eyelashes or whatever. It's a boost and gives you. I absolutely recommend it for people who are traditional portrait photographers as a
And it's a
another
great way
avenue
to
of
use
creativity.
it's a great way to use those same concepts, just exercising a different muscle to do it. You know,
Exactly.
this
And
is
yeah,
really
and
interesting to me.
you can jump back into people easily too. I mean, I don't feel like I'm at a disadvantage because I photograph flowers all the time. I feel like it keeps me sharp
Mhm.
with the same kind of things you're going to look for relationally between people, you
Mhm.
know. Yeah. Is that, oops, that's just the other stuff. So I think that's it. Let me make sure there isn't anything else here. Um, this is just saying I use fill.
Mhm.
This would be a non-strobe option window with, you know, sandwiched. So, um, reflector, window, subject sandwiched between, and then a dark wall. I always paint my walls in my studio dark.
Mm.
They're
Mhm.
like, some kind of either Benjamin Moore. They're just like a Kendall charcoal is one of my favorites. Color. I have a whole house painted that color on the outside because
This is
pink
why we
flowers.
get along. Yes, this is why we get along. Everything dark, everything black, everything dark.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, Okay, so let's take these down for a second because I have more questions for you, and that was super helpful. So if anybody does have questions as they're listening or watching these slides or whatever, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will. I think we should have time at the end to do a little live Q&A.
Okay.
So if you want to stop sharing your screen, Caroline,
Okay.
then okay, there you are. There's your pretty face.
Hi.
Okay, so I have some questions here.
Mhm.
And going back to your gear for just a second, when do you decide? So just walk everybody through, like when you're making your decision about which lens to use, the 24, the 50, or the macro, just maybe give everybody like top one or two things that would help make that decision.
Okay, so if I know I want to get in close, so if I'm photographing something tiny like a clover or muscari, um, also called grape hyacinth, or some little spring ephemeral flowers, whatever's tiny, I'm going to go for the macro lens, just because I could do it with a 50, but I'm going to have to crop in significantly. With the macro, you may as well just get close enough already from the get-go. My problem with the macro is I tend to only think close and I don't step back. I probably could step back and get more in because it is a very stellar lens. But that's what I grab if it's tiny, a tiny subject. Bigger subjects like sunflowers, roses, whole bushes, and I'm going to explore. I definitely go for the 50 because the crop isn't going to be massive. It's going to be maybe a third of the frame is going to get cropped out, possibly, the fire hydrant or whatever. But the 50 is most often for big summer flowers, but I have a affinity and a love for little tiny arrangements.
Mm-hmm.
The beautiful thing about photography is you can kind of fool people. If I love to collect crystal shot glasses that I get at antique stores, like shot glasses or toothpick holders. And I'll put
Okay.
sand in them and put teeny little flowers in it and make an arrangement that, with a photograph, you wouldn't necessarily know it's only 4 inches tall.
Right,
So,
right.
so those would also be shot with a macro lens.
And that was going to be one of my questions too, is that's what I struggle with when I bring flowers indoors and I want to photograph them. I'm like, where's the crop? It's not in a pretty container. Like sometimes I'm just holding it with a clothespin to just make it stand up straight. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, where's the crop? So that's interesting. That answers a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, so all right, so we talked about that. Let me go through my list here. Can we come back to when you got started, you found that this really got you out of your head. Like this is just
Mhm.
kind of like a brain vacation, but
Mhm.
really it's not a vacation like from thinking. It's just a
Right.
vacation from maybe what's on your mind because there's a lot more, as I hope people are seeing. There's a lot more to this than just, throwing everything out of focus or,
Mhm.
backlighting or whatever. There's a lot of thought to it. And
Mhm.
so, can you talk just a little bit about, because you are so passionate about teaching other people how to do this so that we all have this stress relief, this
Mhm.
tool to use in our lives, which are getting crazier by the minute. Can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it isn't really a brain vacation, it's more of a brain redirection.
Mm,
And I think that's a really important point. And if you do something for fun where your brain can wander, it is kind of a minefield if you're suffering from anxiety or you're having a really bad day. Like I can't do needlepoint or knitting or something like that because I'm going to be thinking. I need to do an activity where I'm not thinking about whatever, where my brain has to be focused somewhere else. And I suppose you could do a sport like water skiing or something like that where you have to be fully present, to participate. But flower photography in this manner is very much a brain sink. Like you have to be all in. You're not going to make a good picture if you're not paying attention. And that is the love of it. Plus, it also forces me outside. I actually prefer to shoot in situ out in the garden versus bringing things in. I mean, I do flower arranging because it's a fun diversion and it's good for making books and stuff like that. But it's my true pleasure comes from being in the garden itself, you know, with the sounds of the bees and the birds and the butterflies, and being in that surrounding and creating art in that space, especially when your eyeballs see the mess and the chaos, and then you get rid of the chaos and you make something peaceful and beautiful. There's just a wonderful brain shift that happens as you do that. And I think that most people think, I just want to make pretty pictures, but really it is a joy of the journey process. It is doing this thing that makes me a more sane person, that helps me process. And I probably wouldn't have known that if I hadn't learned in the trenches. It was very much accidental, but it's no less beneficial 10 years later. So
Right.
that's why I think it's important for me to share that, because I think we can't get rid of stress, whether it's our own or our feelings or empathy for someone else that's going through something. Like you can't hide from stress. So having a little mental vacation or redirection every day is just a very beneficial thing.
So what would your advice be to people who say, well, I love this. I love floral photography. I've always wanted to do this, but my garden is a mess. I don't have flowers I can
That's why
grow, or I live in a place that, 8 months of the year we can't grow anything. I live in the desert. Like, what would you give them some tips?
So the thing that I would most say is don't dismiss things right away. I've lived in the South. I've lived in the desert. I've been to the desert a lot. I haven't lived there, but I mean, I've lived in some pretty arid places. The beauty requires you to dig deeper. Like I live on the prairie. I don't live in the mountains. I don't live by a lake. I don't live by an ocean. I don't live by something that is, through a cursory look, gorgeous. Nobody would come here on purpose. But because I'm big into prairie conservation, I had to push in deeper. Like I have to go through 7-foot grasses to find the little flowers that are growing there. I have to look for the bees and the birds and the butterflies that are hiding, that are camoed out. It requires definite effort. And I wouldn't dismiss your location. It may not be roses or peonies or your typical English garden flowers, but you can find beauty. It can be a half inch or a quarter inch. Like the macro lens changes everything. The tiniest thing can be something amazing. And even the desert has really unique things that you can photograph. Plus, most people have something that they can access, whether it be a botanical garden or a community garden or something like that, where someone else is taking on the brunt of that kind of maintenance and is providing an option. In the dead of winter, we can go to the Arboretum in St. Paul, and see things that are growing. There are options. It's just maybe fewer and far between if you live in a really inclement place like I do, where 6 months out of the year we're under snow. There are options. And, in winter, you can do snowflakes. I mean, the same skills that you put to flowers can be used for other things.
And I guess people too could buy flat, like
Oh,
our
yeah.
Trader Joe's has an
Garden.
incredible
Mhm.
floral department, cut
Mhm.
flowers all the time. So I could
Yes.
start with that.
Yes, that's a great place to start, especially for skill learning. And there are some surprising beauties. I mean, I go to Costco and get flowers in the winter as well. There are a lot of things that you can hang on to, and then get to know your neighbors who like to garden. Because a lot of times, as I said, annuals in particular, you got to cut them, otherwise they just get raggedy. They don't last the whole season. So quite often a neighbor would be like, "Fine, come cut it down and take it." And it's all good. Yeah.
So you said something also interesting to me when we were chatting for a few minutes beforehand, and you, again, just this reference back to the portrait world that I love so much, is you said you don't shoot unnecessarily. You're very intentional about the shots that you're taking. So, they're not moving. We don't need to take 20 of the same thing, but
Right.
but you photograph with the intention of printing,
Mm.
which is so important to us as portrait photographers. And I think with social media the way it is, we're all sharing all the time, and you do share, but talk about why printing is so important to you, how you envision this work. Like what's the criteria when you're photographing?
Absolutely. So there's always joy of the journey shooting, but that can lead to a hard drive just filled with hundreds of thousands of nothing. And I really feel that something isn't complete until it's on paper, until it's printed, particularly in an antique frame, or, for me, something that feels physical, that it's my garden brought to life. It has a home, it has a place. And so I do a pretty heavy cull. I do delete through a lot of things that I know I'm not going to print. I mean, sometimes it does take a few shots to get the shot. You trip or you fall or your aperture is not quite right, or whatever. So I do a lot of culling, but I try to shoot for the print. What am I going to print this? How am I going to print this? And it might be something at the end of the year, like a garden album, a record of what I've done. It might be gifts for people at Christmas. There are a lot of things that you can print that just you don't have to keep it all. I print a lot more than I actually hang on my wall. They make great gifts. It's just there's just something. What's the word? It's like it finally rests. You hit the landing zone when you've made a picture that's finally printed. You understand your work better. You understand your purpose better. Yeah.
I love that. It's tangible and it's permanent. So
right.
Yeah.
Tangible. That was the word I was looking for. You want your work to be tangible. I mean, I feel like with the online world, so much of our life is not fake, but I mean, the tangible is something that will last 100 years. And hopefully when I'm dead and gone and people don't know me anymore, maybe they'll find my picture in a thrift store and say, "Oh, I really like that iris. It's really pretty. I want to hang it in my," I want that part of me to live on at least.
As a flower farmer, I think it would be so fun too. I'm sure you already do this or have already thought about it, but when you're selling your flowers or when you start, breeding and crossbreeding and doing your seeds and everything, it'd be so lovely to have some of these images to just be passed down with, because we have irises in our yard from friends and friends in Tennessee and grandparents and all the things. And it would be so lovely if I had that little description of where it started, who started it, how it got to me, who I shared it with or anything like that. So
flowers are universal. Like there is not a corner of this globe where flowers don't play some kind of an emotional part of people's journey. And that's why I think people love them. And I wanted to say the one thing that I mentioned to you prior, I get a lot of people messaging me probably a couple a week where they'll say, "Oh, I like flowers, but everybody photographs flowers." And I shoot back, "Well, everybody shoots people, but does that mean you're not going to shoot people?" Like just because flowers are a universal thing. I think that shows that no matter what culture or country you're in, flowers matter.
Yeah.
They matter.
And it is getting back to like, okay, so quick question. When you garden, gloves on or off?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, I have to wear gloves now because I totally knocked my diamond. Like,
oh my goodness.
Kitty Wampus. Like I completely messed up my diamond last year. And my husband said, "You have to wear gloves."
That's so funny. Or take off the ring.
But no, I'm usually not a glove person because I like to feel what's happening.
Right. And it's supposed to be good for your body chemistry.
Like what if I find a toad and I'm digging a hole? I don't want to hurt anything. Like I want to feel what's going on. But now I wear gloves a lot more.
Yeah.
Plus, like you go to like an event or something and they look at your nails, like there's no saving my nails. Like there's no nails there. You cut everything off. And like, you bite your, no, I don't bite my nails. I just don't have any right now because I didn't want you to see the status of things.
So, one of the things that I think probably is attractive to other people about this kind of photography is, like you said, that mental placement someplace else. We're putting our brains someplace else. What I love so much about what you're saying is just isolating this beauty amongst the chaos, amongst, a huge bush of flowers, and you're finding the one or two or three or whatever. But But everything does work interdependently. And I want to talk about the community that you've started that people can join. I want to show that in just a second. But, one of the big reasons that you and I have become friends and that I've met with, I've met some other incredible Sony Alpha females is because of the program, Sony Alpha Female. So I don't want to forget that, that I want to address that because when they started the Sony Alpha Female program, they had a 6-month creator in residence opportunity. They did that for, I think, 2 years. And I was in that second class, which is how I kind of started my journey with Sony. I was a Sony shooter before then, but that was really my first experience into a community of women who was supportive and like-minded and encouraging, because prior to that, my experiences with groups of women was quite the opposite, threatened or more challenging. So
We've all been there.
yeah, we've all been the mean girls, right? So it was very interesting to come into this Sony Alpha Female family and just feel like, wow, there's no egos here. There's no hidden agendas here. Everybody does want everybody to succeed. And how can I help you? And I think that's an attitude and a culture that's always fostered from the top, right? Like that has to come down from where it started. And so I want to make sure that everybody knows that Sony Alpha Female has a Facebook group that is now, I think, 13,000 people strong. It's grown incredibly in the last few years. They have a weekly micro grant that is just a fun contest that everybody participates in. And they do a little cash prize every week. But more than that, it's just this sense of community. And it's such a diverse array of talents, from, fine art to portraits to weddings to floral to dogs to everything. So that's part of why we wanted to start this series, is to allow a little bit more intimate access to some of the incredible talents in this group. And we're starting with some of the female artisans. And so I really am just encouraging everybody, if you haven't already, to go join that Facebook group and introduce yourself and ask the questions that you have, because everybody is really, really happy to help there. So we have a few minutes left, and I want you to put up your slide with your QR code, because you also have a community that I would love for you to explain.
Sure. Yep. So I have a community, and I will go down here.
Just zoom out just a little bit, Caroline, so that yeah, there we go.
Oops. I don't know what happened there.
That's okay.
We're going to go to this one.
That one. There we go.
I don't know what happened. I think I redid the PDF and I must have hit something anyway. So that is my free flower course. And then you can find my community at caroline-jensen.mn.co, or you can find it on creativephotography.network.com. They both go to the same place, but it's a private Facebook type group, but there aren't any ads. It's a completely private group for botanical photographers, and we actually have quite a mix. We have people that shoot people as well, but the common thread is that everybody loves flower and nature photography and gardening. We have some really, really, really advanced gardeners there. So if you have a question about something, there are some people that are just absolutely on it and can answer questions if you want to jump into the world of growing flowers as well. But yeah. So
and then Caroline, would you mind after this webinar is done recording, maybe you can just put that web address in the Sony Alpha Female Facebook group?
Oh yeah.
Anybody that is maybe listening on their phone right now or watching this later or something and not able to do that, but they can find the link in the Facebook group. That would be great, because I think that's,
sure. I'll
that's
add
tremendous. And then you're giving away this, what is it? This free.
So it's a flower photography audio course. So I am a big car listener. Like I learn a lot with audio, and it might seem like an odd choice to have audio. It's an 80-page PDF as well that shows some of the idiosyncrasies and the slides and the graphics. Some of them I showed here, like the graphics for how my lighting is and all of that. But I walk you through audibly, so you can listen to me tell you all about what I do and how I do it. And that's just a free thing. It kind of gives everybody a good starting point. So if you want to come into the community's free, but a lot of times people don't even know what questions to ask. So this class kind of gets everybody into my head to understand where I'm coming from. And then I am all for talking about all kinds of, light and airy or whatever floats your boat. I'm probably well versed in how to photograph it and love it as well. But this just sort of gets you to understand me a little bit and my process so that you know what questions to ask when you join the community.
That's fantastic. Thank you for putting that up. Okay, so I want to see your pretty face again. So
Okay,
let's
share.
stop sharing. And then we do have one of our fellow Sony artisans also joining in the chat, Amber. She said she
Hi,
loves
Amber.
her Alpha Female friends. And I'm sure you already know this, but Amber is a huge houseplant person in addition to flowers. So maybe you've shown her some things she can do with her houseplants even. So.
Anything with a leaf or a stem can be gorgeous. Yeah, I'm not exclusive to flowers. Like I said, I do a lot of weeds and leaves. Like nothing is better than like water droplets on leaves. So if
Yeah.
you have, a beautiful house plant and you're misting it or something, you could just go crazy with the macro lens and yeah.
Well, you are, as ever, just a fountain of inspiration and generosity. Just ever since I've met you, you've just always been so helpful and just willing to take time to explain things. And I love that you've set up this community. I love that the purpose behind it really started from something painful and became just such a beautiful thing that now you're sharing with other people, and hopefully it will help them and inspire them. And no matter what kind of photography they do, I know I'm ready to kind of figure out what softbox I can thief from the studio today and take out to my garden without Michael noticing and see
You're not
what I
inconspicuous
can
though.
do.
When you start bringing
Yeah.
strobes and modifiers into the
Yeah.
garden, you're not an inconspicuous thing anymore. Like I look like a dork, but I love it. I'm always
That's so
dirty. Wear an
great.
apron. Aprons are a salvation because I wreck everything. So have something to wear if you're going to be on your belly on the grass. Ask me how I know.
Ask you how you know, right? We've got like 2 minutes left. So any other thoughts or tips that you want to leave everybody with? I really, really hope people tune into this. I know I'm going to post the replay everywhere because I learned so much. This is the nice thing about hosting this series is that I can talk to people that I want to learn things from. So
That's
hopefully
awesome.
everybody else enjoyed it, but I loved it. So anything else you want to leave everybody with?
I would say that, to the extent that you can try different things, you try different ways of shooting. I mean, some people love bokeh, some people love, you know, uh, really ethereal things like you said, high key, or try to even borrow a strobe from a friend, if you do it all and see what resonates with you, because the truth is it's not going to resonate with everybody. Everybody's going to have a different way of expressing their love of flowers or nature, and there is no right answer. And I think that a lot of times what I do can be a little bit limiting because it is very expensive gear and lighting, and it's a lot of stuff. But I didn't get here just jumping right into it. It was a very gradual progression. So if you can get the opportunity to practice or, give it a go, you might find a passion that you didn't know you had before. And it's worth every penny. If you use it as much as I do, it's absolutely worth it for what it does. But it can also just be a Sony 90 macro on your camera and laying in the grass and just listening to the buzzing and the wind, and it can be a very minimalistic thing as well. Don't be intimidated by the fact that I have all of this stuff. It's just
You have to start
portraiture.
somewhere.
Yeah, it's just portraiture spilled over into this. Start somewhere, start small.
Well, I will never call you a flower photographer again. It will always be a flower portraitist because I think that's so different and so important. And I just want to take a second and thank B&H because
Yeah.
you're the ones that are just so gung-ho about this community and are allowing us this platform to bring these incredible women to a larger audience and show off what they do, and to Sony for not only allowing us to do these webinars, but for building the community in the first place, because I wouldn't have met incredible people like you and Amber and some of the other people that we're going to be having up in the next coming weeks. I think our next subject is Brooke Shaden, so that'll be
Oh, Brooke.
weeks. We'll put the link up for that soon. But thank you, B&H, thank you, Sony, and Caroline. Thank you for being our first guest, episode 1. You killed it, and I'm so grateful to you and your generous heart. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. I feel very honored. Thank you so much, dear.
Thanks.